You are.
Could be better.
I have no idea. They could have been any of them.
How many did you get?
Something like 30?
Maybe. So, but we're here at Top Rose Quarter, and there was about 6 of them that were not Rose Quarter, so I just. And then a number of them will be in person presentation, like what we would have done anyway. So, yeah.
One of mine in there stood out to you was projections were used based upon CRC.
I remember that one. Not by me, it's by Megan, who's program director. She'll be here.
Hi.
Yeah, Southern Light.
We all made it to class on time, even with traffic, huh?
Well, it looks like
Hardly anybody is here. So I was sharing with Sarah this morning that I was running 10 minutes late to my meeting with a traffic engineering firm that Adrian works at, DKS. And I had my sister say, we are running 10 minutes late in traffic. She said, as a traffic engineer, you cannot use that excuse. So maybe you can use the excuse if I snooze in for the extra 10 minutes, hence in traffic. But there's a lot of stuff going on out there in traffic. I think there's a fire right now. But it's out, but it was off of 33rd Broadway.
I was wondering why there's all this police traffic.
Yeah. So you guys made it, which is great. So I want to debrief from last week's class when Tamika and Millicent and Sarah were here. Just as, what were your thoughts during the week after Tamika's really philosophical talk and the exercise you did with Millicent? Any big takeaways from the class? Yeah.
I was surprised with what Tamika shared. It was really valuable and different than things that, like, she had a whole new things to talk about compared to the other topics we reviewed.
She tailored this differently.
Yeah.
Everyone. Yeah. She's good. I heard that some of my students were tearful.
Yeah, I mean, I was really impressed both with Tamika's perspective, just sort of how she came to where she is, of being, I think she said, a lawyer who bikes a lot. It was a good perspective to hear, and was, I mean, just glad that hadn't encountered Millicent before, and was glad that someone like that, with that like big perspective, but also really smart focused, is part of our institutions. Was great to see, honestly.
So I told her that if she ever runs for office, or if you on the ballot, you'll put her name on there. We'll vote for both of them. We'll win office.
I would totally vote for Millicent. She
She's got class.
She has class, and she knows how to take, it sounds like, from the way she described her experience, she knows how to take any topic and get projects done. Like, even if it's not something that she has a long history in, she knows how to dive into it, learn what she needs to know, and make things happen.
That's very powerful. She doesn't even have a transportation background. You can apply what you know and then bring it into your world. Yeah. Anybody else want to share their thoughts or comments? Yeah.
I really appreciated Tamika. The first couple of classes, I kind of think, well, how does all of this fit together? And when she was speaking, it all fit together for me. I also appreciate the fact that she's plain spoken and she should run for office. I mean, in terms of a person that just comes across as competent and knowledgeable, but at the same time doesn't throw it at you.
She's very kind.
Yeah.
She's very thoughtful. She's very kind, very smart. The one background I didn't know about her was her family was from the project. That was, her dad was from the project, which I thought was really interesting because I have a friend who grew up in DC from the project, and he said that most of his, and he grew up in the civil rights movement time, and there was a big old rally during the time of in DC in the 60s, and he was biking, and MLK was having his I Have a Dream speech. So to me, it was really fascinating to hear my friend, who's a grown-up now in his 60s, recount the story as his life in the project, and then biking to this event in DC where everybody was there, and it was MLK making his speech, which I thought was really fascinating. So I haven't really met anybody who's been like a daughter or a granddaughter of a project, somebody from the project. So it's really fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, I really loved how Tamika sort of brought up.
You tuned in?
Yeah, no, I was on a plane, but I watched it later.
Okay.
How she brought up like entrepreneurs and their like ability to see things that don't exist, and how that's similar to, transportation planners. And I think for myself as a teacher, a lot of what I hope to do is like, give children opportunity for something that might not exist for them. And I thought it was a really great way to sort of connect to different, fields.
I think one of the cool things about the transportation world is so many people can touch transportation and land use and not come from a technical background. You could be an advocate, or you could come in from so many different directions, but you yourself can see yourself as a transportation planner or a transportation engineer, just because you're a part of the system and educating for the next generation. Yes?
Yeah, super impressed with the guests last week, really most of the guests this whole semester. I thought one takeaway for me was just when Millicent had said that, people on the west side feel like projects are for them. People on the east side feel like these projects are kind of to them. And that just was really interesting perspective to hear.
It's pretty true. As long as, true. So very quickly, in terms of projects, how are you guys doing on your projects?
Good. I finally put it into the drive today.
Oh, good. Okay. Do you guys have any thing you want to share as to some of the challenges in your projects? Where you're at? Because we're taking a break next week. Rejoin back again and tell a bit.
Yeah. I was going to say, not necessarily a challenge. Everybody that I've reached out to from Peabot's been super responsive, has been stoked to make time, and that's been really reassuring and neat to see. And it's very obvious that they really treasure this class, and being able to see what some of the classmates are thinking about and working on.
That's something I've noticed too. Using this class opens doors.
There's a legacy with this course.
It took me about 48 hours to get a meeting with the manager of the project I'm doing my project on, and Roger Geller.
Yes,
An
there you go.
hour, they both took an hour of their time in the middle of the afternoon within 2 days of me contacting them and reaching out about it. Now, granted, I already knew the project manager from neighborhood meetings, so she knew who I was and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But especially using this project, and she may regret that I'm doing doing her project in this class, but we'll see. And I kind of say that in a segue to a question to you, since some of the decision makers that a lot of us are doing projects on are going to be here and watching our projects. Is it within our scope to have a direct ask to people that would be in the audience?
So I'm framing the presentation as if you're going to have that elevator ride for the 3-minute ride in 3-minute conversation at council.
Right.
So there have been some projects that have come to fruition as a result of this project. As you know, a couple of them had over the last 28 years have come true. So there's an opportunity for that to happen because we have Director Chris Warner will be here. We're re-inviting you again. It's on the 5th. Oh wait, yeah. But
Was Art coming as well?
I'm sorry?
Was Art coming?
I'm going to re-invite Art and re-invite all of our guest speakers who've come here. And if you're interested, for those that you've spoken to, if you would like, I can also try to bring them into, if you want to bring them into presentations, if they're interested in coming in free on the 5th. So the room is open, I think, in terms of availability. So I think we have a big enough capacity to bring in other guests. So the class is for you, really. The project is for you. So if there's somebody that you really want to have here, let me know.
You think the street trust might come back?
No, I will re-invite Jillian. Oh,
I may bring a representative of Pipeline with me.
okay. Let me know who you bring in.
They'll be nice, I promise.
Yes, yes.
I'm just thinking like, in terms of like the speakers that came in and like those that are working at Peabody, it is probably nice to see like another perspective of projects that, you know, could come forward, I guess, like from people, like citizens in the city. So it's nice for them to see that perspective, I guess.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Yep, absolutely. Anything else? Anyone else? I'm going to close up last week. I remember I did a thank you email with Tamika and Millicent, and Millicent did say it was really hard for her to leave class last week because some of the conversations were so intriguing. And I know she spoke with you for a good long while, but she's like, you have such great, thoughtful students. So I just wanted to share that back with you, is that you guys have come across very thoughtful and kind to most of the guest speakers also, and that's the feedback that I'm getting. So I want to share that with you. And Tamika was saying, I should be really interested to see how this class unfolds in 15 years. And I haven't even thought that far yet. We're just in year 1 of this new evolution. So I'm going to get started with this week. We've got, this is our last class actually before we break for Thanksgiving and finals, and then the field trip. So a couple more occurrences afterwards. But I feel like this is a good class where we could bring everything together again and talk about how the city is working in terms of the neighborhood and community and civic life. And also towards a good latter part is to bring in our guests from ODOT to talk about the Act 5 Willis Square project, which will talk about the past and the present and the future. So essentially, I'm seeing this class as folding everything together at the city and also from a state perspective. So first off, I'd like to introduce our Director of Community and Civic Life. Got it right. It's been renamed Director Rhee. She's going to come and talk about what her initiatives are and what she's doing.
Do not move a little bit. Okay, so I'll use this chair. So suppose I'm going to use the. Yes. So hi everyone. It's really nice to be with you tonight. I hear you're very kind and thoughtful.
I just wanted to prime that person.
Thank you very much. I think my portion is going to be a little bit not, I'm going to say I'm just a warm up after these two superstars.
Hardly.
And I'm going to talk a little bit about transportation and public involvement and civic engagement. And I sent, I'm not sure if y'all had a chance to read, but I sent along a couple of articles. And I know the articles some of them are a little bit downers, right? But the information in them is really critical. And so I just wanted to share a little bit about what's at stake first. So transportation, I know you are here, you self-selected in and you want to learn about transportation. So I know you get why it's so important. But one of the reasons why I shared the New York Times article that's the title, Transportation Emerges as Crucial to Escaping Poverty, is that's a headline that people should, it's not actually a common thought, but in this article, it talked about not only the importance of place, but that the way that many low-income communities get to a better life depends on reliable and effective transportation, right? And that this study, this Harvard study, you can disagree with the study methodology, but just the idea is provocative, that this study showed that upward mobility, in studying upward mobility, commuting time has emerged as the single strongest factor in the odds of escaping poverty. Even so, the relationship between transportation and social mobility in their study is stronger than the relationship between mobility and other factors like crime, elementary test scores, or the percentage of two-parent families in a community. So transportation is this thing that binds many parts of our lives together. And it's critical, right? So I know you all know that, but the impact of good transportation and transit options on all of our lives is really profound. It's just not about commuting, but the way we get to and from different parts of our lives and our city impact the rest of our other outcomes. I also sent the Huffington Post article. The title is unfortunately a little bit inflammatory, but progressive boomers are making it impossible for cities to fix the housing crisis, but they also talk about transportation. So no offense to any boomers, that's a little inflammatory title. But one of the most interesting things in there was the generational differences that come up, and they talked about progressivism and civic engagement. But also when you really think about the generational differences that come about when we think about transportation, that actually is, and we have at least 5 generations in our community now, that actually is a very interesting thing in terms of how people actually respond to these great ideas and also the things that we actually need. They talked also about anti-growth activism as a condition that actually will directly impact urban equality or inequality. So lots of things are at stake. And then I think in both of these, in the City Lab article particularly, it talked about housing more often, but but the relationship between housing and transportation, I think that's pretty obvious, right? Relationship with where you live and your housing and your work and all the things you need in life, that's kind of obvious. But oftentimes people are resisting housing because they don't like the traffic that comes with it, right? So the way transportation is embedded in almost every aspect of our lives, that's what's at stake is really critical. And so because it matters so much and because it matters to everyone, everyone's going to have an opinion. So even when you have something that looks like a great idea or the necessary thing, of course, everyone has an opinion. They have a right to express it and it comes out. But what do we know about public involvement? Well, the research and the evidence base shows that the way we do public involvement in this country, the way we've taught people to do it, it favors, or you see the systems that have been built, it favors older people, people who have lived here longer, people who are wealthier, people who are professionals. It favors men over women. It also favors no over yes, right? So you tend to be involved when you think it has a negative impact on you, and you actually just let it slide when you think it's a positive impact. That's great. Someone else will take care of it. Of course, that will happen, right? So all our systems are geared toward actually toward individualist kind of orientations, how it affects me and the negative effects, rather than promoting the common good. And so one of the, so the City Lab article that I shared with you, actually, if you click through to the actual study, the Boston University study, they have this very interesting phrase, the distortion of the distribution of influence. And that is where even in a place where everyone, we've all voted for affordable housing, for this project, our actual civic engagement mechanisms actually amplify this part of the population who tends to come out, and they tend to have all those other features, and they tend to vote no, and all of a sudden our engagement processes that are meant to bring community perspectives into the conversation, all it does is it amplifies the differences in our power, and not just differences in perspective, but differences in power, and it distorts which part of the population can influence the actual outcome. So these are very sobering thoughts, and so that's kind of my question to you. We're trying to get to, in the Portland Plan and the Climate Action Plan, all of the city adopted plans, we just want to get to work, or we just want to go across town to get something to eat, or go to get some health care, or go to school. For the Portland of 2035 that we're trying to get to, where we are growing from 650,000 now to possibly 890,000, about 900,000 by 2035. If public involvement is going to be critical to our ability to build that city, what do you want actually in terms of change in our public involvement processes, so that we actually can get to a more sustainable, climate-friendly, and equitable urban environment? And so my one thought to you is, how do we get the mechanisms to reflect more of the yes rather than the no's? Because we're not trying to disincentivize people's participation, but how do we get the mechanisms for people who are actually in support built into our civic engagement processes? Because if any of you actually have a project around transportation, you're going to want completed, funded, et cetera, and you need public involvement, then this is going to be a problem or an opportunity for you to consider. So that's all I actually wanted to. Oh, I forgot to say what my office is, community and civic life, right? And so our bureau is going through this right now. We're trying to restart a conversation about what we need as a diversifying, densifying city, what kinds of civic engagement structures and mechanisms we need to include all of us. And we are acknowledging that our origins reflect some of the power structures and the distortions and influence, and we've been part of that distortion historically, but that we made that system and we can make new ones. And so we have every opportunity to get to a different type of city based on what we've learned, and also what we believe, and also what we need to get to, because all those things that I talked about in the beginning are at stake. So I'm going to actually, because this time is for Q&A as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you, do you have any questions? Do you have any responses? Do you have any concerns about public involvement and the transportation projects that you're really excited about and interested in seeing go forward or stop?
What kind of tactics do you guys currently try to use to get people involved who might be supportive, rather than like get the yeses vocalized more so than the no's?
Well, you have to go out and get them. So we've often relied, as government particularly, here are our channels. If people are interested, then they will come. And so that tends to just bring forth those folks who are already connected, and those mechanisms are available to them. They know how to do that. And so for government, particularly, but for any kind of group, going out and getting to the people means that you're just going to, you literally have to go where people are and actually then have those kinds of conversations. And because you're going to where people are, it's really polite to actually have a relationship. And so maybe actually it's not a tactic. It's a long-term investment in relationship building with different communities. Because especially with government, you don't just go to any community and forget the history of government to that community, right? And so oftentimes the outreach is much, much longer and much, much more directed by the community. And so in our most recent work, we're trying to change the code that defines the functions of our bureau, our job descriptions in the city code. And for some communities, we have to reach out to them 3 or 4 times before we can get to that conversation versus hello, building the relationship. What do you care about? What is your experience in the city? And then maybe the 3rd or 4th conversation is, would you be interested in talking about this thing that we want your opinion on? So maybe if you're transportation, your first conversation is not about your project. It's actually just about building a different kind of relationship. The other things are like if you do a survey, there are surveys you can distribute and maybe they'll come back to you, or you could actually do intercept surveys. You actually go out and get the information where people are. If you want to have a forum, instead of doing that, this was listed in one of the articles, you don't, you could just have a forum that's one day, or you could actually have a day-long or even days-long open house kind of opportunity so that people come in. So you really have to ask yourself, what is the cross-section or the distribution of perspectives you want to gather? And then you need to make the investments to actually to pursue that, because they won't come to you very easily. So basically, everything you thought you wanted to do is not going to work. And you're going to have to really invest in some other ways to get what you need. So, I don't know, maybe other people have better ideas that you've used in the past and you found effective. I mean, and also I didn't even state the obvious things such as language, culture, generational differences. And so even the way you talk about something is you have different paradigms in people's minds about what it is that you're actually talking about.
I'm trying to think how to ask this, but I guess thinking about the proposed changes with respect to neighborhood associations and so on, how do you think about, like, when you're seeking public input or doing that outreach, are you seeking to more to hear the views that are out there, or to get a sense of what the dominant or consensus views? It seems like anyway, whether it's through neighborhood associations or whether it's through just individual interest groups, it's always sort of a self-selected group that does it. So to what extent are you listening to your, is everyone saying this thing versus what are all the views out there?
Yeah, I think another, I would posit that you want to understand like the spectrum of thought. That is, if you ask 100 people and you only got 100 responses or majority from this spectrum, that actually you have partial understanding of what is real, right? And so when so reaching out to a broad cross section of the community, if you can't do something that's statistically significant, that's one thing, but you want to do something that's more inclusive and methodologically sound. And so the more you can get the spectrum of thought, but then depends on who the decision maker is. How do you weigh the differences of opinion, right? So one, you want to know at least the range of opinion out there, but then how do you weigh that? And this is something where it's not just about politics. When you look at our history as a country, how do you weigh the voices for justice and for equality and equity alongside the louder voices or the more mainstream or the more powerful? Almost everything that we've accomplished in terms of social progress in our country never been popular. So Civil Rights Act, popular now, was not popular then. You took a poll, a show of hands, it would have been a minority vote, right? So we really, at a certain point, it's not about methodology or process. It's about our values, our commitments, and do we actually believe in something that we call equity, and we can debate about what equity looks like and how it gets implemented. But I think there's a point where public involvement processes will show you that we have different starting points as communities. We have different relationships with government, and we actually have different worldviews in some cases, really different cultural worldviews about our resources, our relationships to each other. And when you have that, it really becomes, that's why civic engagement is that process where we deliberate what the common good is. And that's also a big lofty concept, but that's actually what we're talking about. Because many times the more equitable investment, the investment that you want to see us make historically, that you want to be on the right side of history of that decision, are not the popular ones. They're not widely supported. So how do you attend to the voices for justice in this spectrum of thought? And that is why we get all intense and passionate about it, because it matters to all of us, and that's what we're really deliberating on. So sometimes we are talking about a street, but oftentimes we're talking about some larger forces in our community's history, and this has become an expression of what that is. Like Williams, right? Were we really talking about bike lanes? No, we were talking about gentrification, we're talking about displacement, we're talking about power. We weren't just talking about bike lanes. So I don't know, if you have other people, the wisdom is already in this room as well. If other people have responses to questions, and then I saw a hand back there and then here. Oh, and also I forgot to ask for your name. So what was your name?
Wells.
Willis?
Wells, yeah.
Wells?
David.
I'm Millie. Earlier you were talking about the problem of people talking about things that are in their self-interest, right? They're not necessarily in the community's interest, but what is going to get somebody engaged is something that impacts them, and they're going to want to push their interests in it. So when we're thinking about transportation projects, that's something that happens to us too. We wind up thinking about, well, what project should I work on? What is impacting me? How do you get away from that? And how do you see, what are some tricks or something to see the bigger picture and to get away from your own self-interest and try to see the system as it's impacting everybody and figure out through that kind of a lens where to best put your resources?
I would love to hear other people start on that. I don't know if, so self-interest is also, let's say that's a neutral thing, but it's dominant, right? And so how do we start understanding self-interest in a collective sense? So actually it is in my self-interest if other people are housed, right? And so I don't think that we will ever get away from self-interest, and that's inherently bad, but how do we start as a community who's really wired for individualistic thinking and not seeing systems? So I think it would be, and there are communicators and there are other people better at it, you seem to know a lot about it, is our self-interest needs to start being defined in the collective good and in the relational realities that we live in. And I think it's helping people understand how their self-interest is really connected to the common good. But I don't think any of us have mastered that. And so I'm curious why you felt like that was, have you had experience in doing that?
I don't. I was thinking very similarly to Millie, the statement you made at the beginning. People think very individualistically with self-interest, not societally. Very much echoed what was in the Boomer article, the Progressive Boomer article. I don't think this is necessarily about morality. I think this is about thinking logically, thinking long-term, not just thinking about what's right in front of you. So the article about the person in Damascus who had to ride a bicycle. I used to live over in that area. He was probably riding down 27. There are basically two arteries to get from Frederick to DC. It's 27 to Montgomery County, and then some other roads, 4270. When you think in a short-sighted way, individualistically, you create a society like that where now everybody's in each other's way constantly. If people had been able to think with a broader mindset, we could have created public transportation systems that would have alleviated so much of that congestion. I believe it's bus 90 that runs on 27, runs once an hour, and it actually runs 2 different routes. It's one of the most confusing buses ever. So anyway, just kind of to echo that, and the question there that I have is, I wonder how we can, I totally agree that we want to understand what the community thinks, but I also think people are aware of their issues and they don't always understand the correct solution. So how do we get the feedback, but also present the vision and the education? I feel like we're a very individualistic society in a short-sighted way, where we don't recognize how societal benefit comes back to benefit us so greatly. The guy on the bike that fell off his bike, that could have resulted in multiple injuries. Even if you don't care about him, you still might get hurt in that process. But if we create a better system, that's not going to happen. Sorry, more of a comment, but I guess the question there really is, how do we educate and how do we balance, I think this is echoing kind of what you were getting at, Millie, vision, but also that feedback. I feel like otherwise we're just going to hear people want more roads, or they want a very specific way that they always have seen things done.
I don't have a complete answer for you, but I would say that, and I know there's a hand in the back.
We also have a question online that I want to address also.
To your question, let's let that be the last one. I would like the group to respond to that, because it's not just because I certainly don't have all the answers. And what was your name?
I'm Andrew.
Andrew. I don't know if you folks use pronouns too, but
there's like there's like 5 Andrews in this class. It took me a while to figure it out. Not everyone's almost an Andrew.
And then there's
you have Andrew.
This is also Andrew.
Oh, Andrew. Only Andrews can speak now.
Excuse my tardiness as well. I have just 2 quick questions. I was just curious to see how long does the city of Portland plan for the community engagement piece for a certain project? Like, do they wait oh, this is 1 year that we're going to do a whole bunch of community engagements before we really use their input or not within the project? And then the other question is there any cultural specific approaches that the city of Portland uses to reach out to communities that's been missing at the
Yeah. So I don't think there is a standard, and it depends on the project. And sometimes the outreach ends up being extended for lots of good reasons, good and bad reasons. So there is no one standard. And I think our ODOT partners will also speak to that. And I would say that we've started to be more, we started innovating in the last 15 years and even the last 5 years about more culturally specific responses. And I will give one example, one or two examples. Well, one is our bureau, when we were founded as the Office of Neighborhood Associations, we actually formalized relationships with one type of grassroots groups and community groups, neighborhood associations. And then then all the other bureaus started pointing and using just that network. So we actually, for very many years, and to this day, we favor going to a certain type of community group, but we know that's not the extent of the whole community, right? And so there was a recent, I don't know if you had Peabody come talk about the 7th and 9th bike route. So when they use our prescribed method of just neighborhood associations, they got certain perspectives. But there was a whole community that had been displaced, and that was largely the African American community. And when they realized the existing channels that we had prescribed only gave them this part of the population, they had to reach out to groups that actually don't come, that they may not live there anymore, but that is their home. They have these connections. And so then when they were able to recognize the deficit in their outreach, they actually engaged a whole different part of the community in non-traditional ways. and they ended up changing their mind of what that route was, right? So that's an example of when you do it, you actually will get a different outcome. Another example, and I love talking about our colleagues at PBOT in a positive way, they were looking at, have you heard about Walking While Black? About that report? Okay, so that's never, you have to ask different questions and have a different analysis to even, you have to have a different analysis to even ask the question so that you get the community feedback. But they were noticing, so bureaus are getting smarter about the things that we said were the right way to do it. Neighborhood associations is not a wrong way to do it, but that is only one, and it's only going to get you certain kind of outcomes, right? So we've gotten smarter about saying that's one, we need multiple, and we need different ways to do things. Most of our events are English speaking, and we put it upon the community to ask for interpretation. We've gotten much smarter about just conducting outreach with bilingual, bicultural partners in their communities, and so that you don't ask for interpretation, so you'll actually reach those populations, right? So those are just tactics and methods, but it's really the thinking behind it is, do we know who our community is? We have census data, demographic data, with lots of data. And when your methods are not delivering what you know about who the community is, then don't stick to your methods. The real insight is your methods are maybe a starting point, but they're insufficient, and change up your game. And that's where we see bureaus innovating a lot more. But truth be told, our bureau was one of the origins of saying, do it this way, and keep insisting, do it this way, and this will get you what you need. And we figured it out, like that's the floor, but the ceiling and the need for different approaches is critical. I was almost going to say life or death. It was like, it might be life or death. I can't prove it, but it's definitely critical. So
I have a question online, and I told our viewer I'm gonna ask it.
All
so
right.
I'm gonna read it off.
Okay.
To what extent is the problem of civic engagement being limited to economically advantaged populations a problem that rests with civic engagement professionals and the models they use rather than with the economically advantaged who have engaged this way for decades?
Yes. I think I understand the question. And so, I would say yes, it's, especially when you're a government, is if you have prescribed that method, that's your accountability. It's not the people who use it, right? So I think my commentary is a commentary about government. What is our responsibility, right? Not our good people of all different stripes and what are the things they need to access. It's not about the people who use the system, but how does government set up those structures? And when we know that they're unequal, then what's our obligation and our opportunity to make those changes? So it's like, so I would say we just had Veterans Day, right? So this is another way to put it. My brother is a veteran. He served in the 2 Gulf Wars. I support him unconditionally, and I'm very proud of his service. I fundamentally disagree with the foreign policy. So we're talking about foreign policy, government's choices, and government's role in creating that, not the people who serve. And so that's the distinction, is putting the focus on the professionals, the systems, the institutions that actually say these processes, these methods, that's where we should examine those choices, and not good people who want to participate and are just taking advantage of the mechanisms that are available to them. So,
thank you.
Yes, and I think we're out of time.
We are out of time. This is awesome.
Yes, and I'm here to listen to Shelli and Megan as well, so I'm going to scoot back.
Thank you so much. Give her a round of applause. So up next, our ODOT guests. I've been waiting to bring Shelli in for at least 5 years. Anyway. My class, and I found the perfect class to bring you in. Shelli Romero, area manager with ODOT Region 1, Megan Channell with ODOT project manager at Five Rose Quarter. Program director. Now your titles have changed. Yes. So I'm going to give them the floor. Here's your chance.
Right. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be back. I'm a Viking myself, got a MPA here, and so appreciate this opportunity to talk to you. I thought maybe first, Megan, you and I could tell the class a little bit about some of our background. Maybe I'll start.
Yeah,
I was born in Southern California, but raised since my first year of life in Oregon. I've lived and worked in urban, rural, and suburban communities my whole life. I was raised on the picket line advocating for farm workers' rights as a girl. Our family's hero, we got to meet several times over, was Cesar Chavez. My dad was the co-chair to rename 39, if any of you remember that. That was not political intriguing mess, but it did happen. And then when the signs actually went up, I was involved in my own capacity, not my ODOT capacity, but then in my ODOT capacity, when signs went up on I-84, I was involved with that part. So I've been at ODOT 13 years. I had about 4 different jobs there. And I'm here today. Maybe I'll let Megan tell you a little bit about herself.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having us here tonight. It's exciting to be able to chat with all of you. So again, I'm Megan Channell. I'm the project director for the I-5 Rose Quarter Improvement Project. I am originally from Fresno, California, and started my career in planning in the San Francisco Bay Area. Started off as an environmental planner, worked on a number of different projects, land use, transportation, and just fell in love with transportation. And so from that, I took my path towards transportation planning, worked at a number of different consulting firms, and then a transit agency back in the Bay Area, and then moved to Oregon and Portland just over 3 years ago to join the Rockstar ODOT team in Region 1. And I started off as a planner in the major projects unit, and in the 3 years since being there now, moved up to be the project director for Rose Quarter. So it's been an exciting time. I guess with that, happy to kind of jump into the project.
I first want to say you guys submitted to us a few questions. Just,
a thoughtful group and a kind group here too. Remember that.
Yes. So we were able to, I think, integrate a number of the responses to the questions in our presentation. But if during the presentation you find that we haven't quite hit on your question, you can feel free to ask us. We have some time at the end to entertain questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Megan, and then I'm just going to kind of chime in as she needs me or wants me to.
Yeah, I mean, so this evening, Shelli and I are really going to focus on sort of process of developing the Rose Quarter project. We've had a number of community engagement opportunities to dig into the specifics of what the project is and isn't. We're happy to do a little bit of that here, but just kind of wanted to take a step back and really a step up in what was the process, the planning program to get us to where we are today, what have we done, and where are we going? And I think kind of starting after hearing our director's speech here, we will also speak to the community engagement processes. There are a lot of things that were resonating that we've done and ideas for how we can definitely do better in the future. So just for a framing for what we have for you today. So let's see if I can get this to go. Do I have to point this in a specific direction?
Give it a try now.
Yay.
Great. Love it. So many of you are probably familiar with this area, but this is the I-5 Rose Quarter Improvement Project area. We are talking about the area of I-5. Does this also have a pointer? Okay. The area of I-5 between 84 to the south and then 405 to the north. This project not only focuses on the highway, but a number of elements on the local street system and how it can be a catalyst for redevelopment in the broader area. So this is just sort of a framing of the area that we're talking about.
And our project partners for the I-5 Rose Quarter project are the City of Portland, the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and the lead partner, PBOT.
So this is taking a step back in time before we get into what is the project. I think it's important to ground ourselves in the history of the area, as you very much heard in the prior presentation. So this is the same Rose Quarter area in the 1950s. And as you can see, it's a well-connected grid network. And
Shelli is going to speak to some interviews that we did with folks that lived in this area previously, and specifically the African American community. But one of the main things that we heard is this was the historic African American neighborhood. It was a vibrant community. People who lived here had everything that they needed. They could walk out their door, groceries, healthcare, recreation, family. And when, this is an image of that area, the intersection of Russell and Williams back in the 50s.
It was very walkable. There was a thriving jazz district.
But in the 1960s, during an era of national highway building, I-5, along with other public and private developments, including Veterans Memorial Coliseum, Legacy Emmanuel Hospital, what is Moda Center today, as well as other urban renewal efforts, changed this and disconnected and displaced the community. And so as we look forward to this project, we ground ourselves in that history and the harm that was caused by government in this area, and thinking strategically and creatively on how we can do better. Not only in how we can do better in engaging communities in thinking about the possibilities for this project, but how we can do better in contracting mechanisms to ensure that we are maximizing opportunities for minority-owned businesses or small businesses in our Portland region, and how we can really stitch back together a community that was disconnected.
And it was in particular the African American community that was displaced.
So this is the area that we have today, I-5 running north and south. Just a little bit of grounding for who uses this area. I guess, show of hands, who has traveled through the Rose Quarter before? Everybody, okay. So starting kind of below on I-5, this segment of I-5 between 84 and 405 has some of the highest traffic volumes in the state. There's over 120,000 vehicles using this each day. It's also an interstate, so serves a high, it's very important in the freight network as well, so serving our economy and keeping our freight moving. But it also has significance on the local system. So you've got the Broadway-Weidler corridors, also carry some high traffic volumes along with transit, including Portland streetcar. Then you've got Williams and Vancouver that are running north and south through this area. Again, these are significant corridors and some of the highest volumes of bicycles in the city as well. I think our last number that we've got from our partners at PBOT was there's nearly 5,000 people biking on Williams and Vancouver each day during the peak period. Couple that with, you know, a Blazer game or Winterhawks game, or I don't know, maybe Beyonce will come to town sometime soon. But that's all to say that there's thousands of more people coming to this area.
Earlier this week.
Yeah,
Share.
Yeah. Alta Barrow was completely.
Alta Barrow is never a place you want to go if anything is going on.
I just discovered that on Tuesday night.
We learned nothing else from our presentation. That was a good local tip. But anyway, that's all to say there's a high number of users in this area that we are navigating and trying to address as we look towards improving the transportation, sort of land use and community framework in this area.
And they represent all the modes: people who walk, people who bike, people who take streetcar, people are using the MAX, people are using the bus system, cars, and freight.
We may be using scooters too.
Yeah. I've used an e-scooter through the area. So take it kind of, how did we get to the project that we have today? This was really a number of years in the making. I know one of the questions earlier was, how long do you plan for a community engagement process? I think the answer I would echo is it really depends on the project. And this project has been going on for decades. And with the most significant community engagement process really starting in the early 2000s. But I-5 was built in the 1960s, as you saw in the photos earlier, built as 2 through lanes in this direction. Our city, our region, our state has grown in population since then, and I-5 itself has not been improved since it was originally constructed. And so it has resulted in significant safety and operational issues. So this area also has the highest crash rates in the state. for an urban interstate, there are 5 or 6 on and off ramps coming within a 1 mile plus segment. So it results in a lot of friction of traffic merging and leaving. So there's a high volume of rear ends and sideswipe collisions. So we are seeking to address safety. It also has operational issues with sort of this being a significant bottleneck in our state. And so to address those 2 issues, there's been years of study to look at, well, what can we do to address those transportation elements on our system? And back in the 80s, we as ODOT proposed a project that would have added numerous new through lanes, new ramps that it would have further exacerbated the disconnection and displacement of the past. And that just wasn't palatable. Through community engagement and coordination with our local agencies, determined that just wasn't a palatable approach. So we went back to the drawing board and looked at different concepts, worked with the community to identify what is the right sort of practical solution approach for addressing the issues in this area. So I think most significantly, in 2010 and 2012, there was a process called the, there were 2 plans. It was 2 plans, 1 process, really linking up transportation and land use. We formed a unique partnership with the city of Portland, and again, looked at how can we address these transportation needs, but in a way that also helps facilitate the type of development that the community wants to see in this area, the type of connections. And so we, through this, sort of winnowed down and we reduced the scope of the freeway improvements. We reduced the project costs. We reduced the amount of right-of-way that we would need, meaning we reduced the number of businesses or homes that we would need to acquire, and to the fact that we're not actually needing to impact any homes as part of this project. And then reducing the adverse community effects. And with that, I engaged a 30-member stakeholder advisory committee, looked at 70 different design options to kind of address those elements in this area. And really, this process helped identify the recommended design concept that we have today for the Rose Quarter project.
There's a couple of things. The 30-person stakeholder committee, as you might guess, it represented some of, I would say, the usuals, but also there were some non-usuals. So we made sure that we had, we reached out to culturally specific organizations and had representatives like Mitch Purcell from the Urban League, like Cynthia Gomez from the Latino Network, and some other folks. And then these were also public meetings. So, you know, we had time on the agenda in case people wanted to come and testify or provide some public comment that went into the record for their particular thoughts. It wasn't a perfect process, but I think given what we had in front of us, it was, you know, the best that we could do. And you can see that when the Greeley northbound Banfield section study started, I mean, we're at 30 years.
So the next slide here.
Cluttered in a minute ago. There we go.
Okay. Well, this again, it speaks a little bit more to that linking land use and transportation planning together. So again, 2 plans, 1 process. From this came the city's north-northeast quadrant plan. So the land use plan that ultimately got embedded into the recently adopted Central City 2035 plan for the city of Portland. And then for ODOT came out the I-5 Broadway Widler facility plan, which identified the design concept that we are moving forward with today as part of the Rose Quarter project. And at the time, both of those plans were adopted by City Council back in 2012, as well as the Oregon Transportation Commission to tee us up for where we are today. This is just taking another step back in time so you can kind of see some of the examples of designs that were considered previously. So number of new through lanes and ramp connections, different thoughts around interchange configurations and how they would tie into the local street system, diverging diamonds, split diamond interchanges. So this is just to show that there are a number of different engineering options considered to get us to where we are today. And with really a guiding principle, again, acknowledging the history of the path or the history of this area How can these be designed in a way that limit impact to the community? How can we maximize the right of way that the public agencies already own? What can we do in that area so that we can help improve community connections rather than further displacing and disconnecting the community? So the purpose and need of the project, as I mentioned before, is to improve the safety and operations of I-5 between I-84 and 405, and also improve the safety of our surface streets and multimodal connections. And again, this is based on the safety need that I mentioned before and the operational needs and travel reliability through this area as it relates to this being part of the freight network. The more delay that we have in this area, particularly for freight, has an effect on our economy, price of goods, and just keeping our economy growing.
And we'll be adding shoulders which don't exist today on I-5 so that when there's an accident, emergency responders and ODOT incident response can pull those accidents off to the side to get traffic flowing again.
Yeah. So yeah, these are the project elements. So yeah, as Shelli said, along with the auxiliary lanes, full shoulders would be added. But in order to do those improvements, we have to take down the structures that cross over I-5. So Broadway and Weidler, Williams, and Vancouver cross over I-5 in this area. And so as we were looking, and Flint as well, thank you. And as we were looking at improving those streets, would we rebuild them sort of as independent bridges as they are today? And through working with the community process and the 70 design options that I mentioned before, the outcome was highway covers or wider bridges, caps over I-5. So you can see them conceptualized here. And I know that this image looks like the project is fully designed, the cake is baked. I want to re-emphasize that we are in the infancy of design. This is really intended to spur comment, not to be a final design. And so there's a lot of there's a lot more community process to come, and we definitely don't want to presume what the community wants on top of the highway covers, but have to show something to kind of spark an idea and show what's proposed. So the highway covers, again, provide new space over I-5, so for wider bike lanes, wider sidewalks, but also new community space, which we need your help and the community's help in defining what that will be. Lids. So don't be shy about this because it's the first highway covers that would ever be in the state of Oregon. So you've not seen these before here. But think of them as wide bridges. So if you're crossing Broadway today on the sidewalk, you can kind of look down over the fence and you can see I-5 right below you. With the highway cover, it literally covers I-5, so it feels like you're crossing more of a normal city street without the sort of visual and physical barrier of I-5 below. Will there be buildings on it? We don't know. We need a community process to define what's going on top of the highway covers.
Are you looking to do engineering them such that there could be buildings on top?
That's something that our team is exploring now in partnership with the city. I will say that to date, the recommended design concept assumed more passive and open spaces on top of the highway covers. I'm glad you bring this up. I was going to get to it later, but now's a good time. In order for the highway covers to support uses on top, they have to obviously have the structural integrity to support those uses on top. And the heavier types of uses that you want on top, buildings, the stronger that structure needs to be. And with a stronger structure, that means that the bridge deck crossing over I-5 has to be thicker, stronger. And so the more weight that you want to put on top of the highway covers, the thicker your highway cover becomes. And so as we are looking to reduce impacts of the project, we've assumed a depth that allows passive or open spaces, plazas, food truck carts, community gathering spaces, so that the highway covers can sort of tie into the existing street networks on either side. But if you create highway covers that carry more uses on top or heavier uses like buildings, you're either creating a really tall highway cover and a steep grade to get to the top the peak of the highway cover, or you are having to expand your impact area east and west on the local street network to kind of match grade. And so it's a balance of what we're trying to do. You've heard me say we're trying to create community connections and really kind of address the harm that I-5 had in the past by reducing the barrier that it is today. At the same time, we don't want to do that at the detriment of either creating these really steep grades that would not be accessible or impacting more and more property east and west. So that's the balance that we have as we're considering the question on what goes on top.
Wouldn't it be really noisy if it were a park on top of a freeway?
Yeah, I mean, I think the noise levels, you've stood next to freeways before, so that's definitely part of the consideration of what's the user experience in those areas and what's the best type of use. You know, the highway covers themselves, obviously the edges are closer to the freeway than the inside, so it's not just sort of a blanket answer around what shall go on the highway covers. It's like, well, if we have these different spaces on the highway covers, how can each of those spaces be appropriately programmed based on where they are and what the conditions are?
Some of it you probably won't be able to figure out until you build it.
Yes.
We have 2 questions right here.
Have we considered making the highway deeper, like digging?
Yeah, so actually that's part of the current design right now is we are looking at how we can reduce the depth of the highway to give us a little bit more space. That said, on either side of the on either side of this area where I-5 goes into the trench, to the south you have elevated structures that are connecting to the Markham Bridge, and to the north you have elevated structures that connect to the Fremont Bridge. And so in order to kind of maintain those connections, there's only so much that you have to work with. So it's a really constrained and complicated space in that area. But yeah, that's a good question and something our team is looking at.
Professor, you had a question?
I know I do have a question, but I'm trying to see if I can take this as an example. Highway covers are like an urban designer's dream come true, right? They have this space where they could just design whatever. Because I've taught in the urban design studio, and the architecture students just love it because they're like, oh, this is awesome because we could do greenery, we could do green infrastructure, we could do all these amazing things. But then you have to look at the stability of the infrastructure to make sure it's sustainable. And correct me if I'm wrong, anybody here also, but is Mercer Island in Seattle function similarly to a highway cover? I'm just Googling it because I remember like somewhere somebody mentioned it because they have acreage of parks and park space and all that. So,
yeah, I can't speak of it specifically Mercer Island, but Seattle has a number of highway covers.
Okay,
and
yes.
Boston. Yeah,
Boston, okay.
Boston has highway covers,
Yeah.
Dallas.
Tunnel? The big dig, the tunnel.
It is a tunnel.
It's a tunnel, but
But there's kind of park space on top.
Yeah, that's right.
So where would we see an example of something that's like this, where it's just sitting on top and there's a park on top of a freeway that's not, the freeway's not literally dug into the ground?
Yeah, I think it's downtown Seattle, Freeway Park.
They do have Freeway Park, but this seems more like you just have wedges.
No, there's a whole bit between Weidler and Broadway.
It starts here and it starts here, and I wouldn't get too caught up on the shape of the highway covers right
Is there a
now.
possibility of connecting, I guess would be the question.
So that gets to the fun question of, is it a highway cover or is it a tunnel? No, these are good questions. We're here to kind of address your questions and interests. So this is great, and if we're going too deep, I'll move us along. But the moment that you connect the two highway covers, they do become a tunnel, and tunnels trigger different requirements than highway covers, and it's really based on the length. You get into things like fire life safety requirements. What types of fire suppression systems do you need? Should there be a fire or some sort of vehicle tanker explosion, if you will, in this area? What's that fire suppression system need? And what are the ventilation needs? And so those not only affect, again, the structure and its impact to the area, but also have an effect on cost. And so it's weighing all of these things on whether we can tolerate a tunnel or keeping the two separate highway covers. And at this point, it is the two separate highway covers.
Where do they start in that? It's kind of hard to see.
I'm sorry that it's, I wish we could like go out there and I could point, but so just south of Weidler here would be the south end of the south highway cover. And then this area right here is currently open.
Okay, so that wouldn't be a park there.
So this is part of the highway cover as well. And extending north, here's the highway cover. So I'll do a quick circle around.
That's one highway cover.
That's one highway cover.
So
both mouse and pointer. You're getting it. I'm gonna take
This is all just concept, right? So this is all gonna change.
Yeah.
This is, okay.
We have a community process to go through. Yep, and then the north cover is on Vancouver. And then you might be wondering, what is this street here? Well, that's a completely new street that the project would also construct. It's called the Hancock-Dixon connection. And so what you don't see, so Flint Street today crosses right here in this area. Flint is actually removed as part of the project and not reconstructed as it is today, but is constructed as reconstructed as a new east-west connection across I-5 called the Hancock-Dixon connection. And this was actually something that came up in significant conversation in the planning process on what to do with the street network here. And really the city had a strong preference for adding a direct east-west connection from the north-northeast community down to the lower Albina community, because right now it's disconnected. And so this would add a new direct connection across and improve east-west connectivity across I-5. And then this connection would serve a lot of the users of Flint today, along with some other bicycle and pedestrian transportation improvements in the area.
You had a question, didn't you, for a while?
Yeah.
Oh, we did? Okay. And then right here?
Yeah, so maybe I've just like missed this whole concept. What's the point of the covers in the first place? Like, we're talking about the freeway, but all I'm hearing is the cover part, and so maybe I'm just missing like the intention.
Yeah, so as you know, the purpose and need of the project is safety and operations of I-5, but in order to build the auxiliary lanes and the shoulders on I-5, we have to tear down all of the crossings of I-5 in order to build those. And so we have a chance to be more intentional in what we build on top. And so in working with the community and that prior sort of design concept process, there was a desire to do highway covers that would help reduce that physical and visual barrier of I-5 in the community, and an opportunity to kind of stitch back together the community that was originally disconnected.
Here?
At this point, is there any possibility that nothing would happen, and maybe just like congestion pricing and like tolls or something?
Yeah, we as ODOT, and really, I guess, as even further directed by the legislature, with House Bill 2017, which is the transportation funding package that was passed back in 2017, is focused on congestion relief in the Portland metro area. And we know it's going to take a lot of different tools and mechanisms to address congestion in the area. And so the Rose Quarter project is really addressing some geometric issues and really with safety and operations in this area. But with that as well, there's another effort happening within ODOT to study congestion pricing. There was a feasibility study done, that just last year?
Yes.
And we were directed to look at the I-5 and I-205 corridors. And so from that, there was a recommendation to look at more focused areas on 205. So the area near the Abernethy Bridge and to I-5. And then on I-5, sort of from the Multnomah Village area to North Portland. And so that study. Those studies are continuing, and we recognize that it's an and both, and not an either or. There's a number of different improvements that we need to make in our metro region to address the congestion.
Okay, we're going to take your question and then we're going to move on to the presentation so we can make sure we get through. Go ahead.
Kind of following up on that question, what kind of thought is being given to demand management rather than capacity management? I'm thinking in terms of congestion pricing, tolling, separating commercial traffic out from passenger car traffic. As part of like the Columbia River crossing, not to bring up sore subject, but as part of the design element there were some concepts there about having basically a truck bypass that kind of ran from, if you take the existing UP yards and you go up past Swan Island, that kind of cuts into the UP right away. There was a thought about actually making that a truck corridor and getting the commercial traffic off of I-5. And then there were some other things I'd seen about possibly making 405 a truck corridor and keeping everybody else. But anyway, what kind of thought's being given to that rather than just extrapolating out what we've got now, which is a bunch of 80-foot trucks that can kind of come through the corridor at will? You know, could you go to Amazon and say, you're welcome to use I-5, but you can't run any trucks up and down it. You can use it between midnight and 5 a.m., but you can't use it other times. Or if you do use it other times, you pay an increasing fee for that. But anyway, again, one of the things I have struggled with this is basically a lot of this simply extrapolates the current environment and the current users. And is that going to get, is there other things you're doing besides simply making the road wider?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think, so this project is the sort of the physical improvement of new auxiliary lanes and shoulders to help give drivers more time and space for merging and weaving. It really has a safety nexus and improvement. And so, as I said, with that, ODOT, we're also looking at tolling in this area and the type of tolling that would be on I-5 as well. Is it tolling one lane? Is it dynamic tolling based on the level of congestion? And so that's a lot of the issues that we're grappling with right now on I-5 and I-205 to get to the issues that you're mentioning as well. You know, and obviously I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, we also have to address our multimodal network on top with bicycle and pedestrian improvements and transit improvements. And so as our, you know, while the focus is on the safety and operations on I-5, equally so it's on the local street system as well. So what are those improvements that we can make for the people that are walking, biking, and using transit in this area?
I have to ask there, you said improvements, but wasn't ODOT's analysis that after this project, bus transit service would be slightly slower than before? Transit on Broadway and Weidler with streetcar actually improves with the operational improvements as part of this. The lines 4 and 44 buses that run through here on Vancouver and Williams, there was a slight delay to transit in that area, depending on the time of day and direction, but it's on, it's a trade-off. And so, yep, and so TriMet's actively working with us right now on how we, knowing that is a slight effect, what can we do to help make it better?
Okay, I know that you had a question too in the back. And
no, I wasn't going to.
Are you sure? Go ahead.
Question. I was just thinking to myself in the back at the comment, and it's no disrespect to anyone in the class, but if we can hold questions until after.
Thank you.
Because as a person that's from Portland, I'm very highly interested in this project. And the teachers said email questions.
I did.
I had them on Tuesday. If there's anything else that pops up, I mean, feel free, you know, keep going.
Thank you. Thank you.
To make time efficient.
You know. Yeah, let's do it.
All right.
Let's do it.
All right.
All right.
I'm going to turn over to Shelli to talk about some of the community engagement tactics that we used to get us to where we are today.
So today at ODOT, I'm an area manager, but before that, I was the community affairs manager. So the community affairs manager manages the unit at ODOT in Region 1 that manages the people that basically are responsible for developing, designing, and implementing a public involvement process for every project in the region that is ODOT's. Some of those include projects perhaps that we have fully outsourced to engineering firms that have in-house capacity for public involvement, but even if they're writing it, we're guiding them, we're directing them, we are QA/QCing it, we are making sure that they're implemented. So, so Megan comes to ODOT and she gets assigned this project, and I'm like, oh my, what area is this? What project is this? Oh my. And so I was like, before you start the environmental process, the NEPA process, this area's got a lot of history. And I just turned 50, so I was here in the 90s as a social service worker when a lot of the gentrification was happening in this area. And so I said to Megan, we need to get out and we need to talk to people in the African American community. We need to do it ahead of you starting this NEPA process. It's going to be really, really important. We need to develop trust. We need to hear from people that experience displacement. We need to hear about the lessons learned. So we not only do we not replicate them, but we actually try to see, is there something that we could even do that could be an opportunity for this project? And so I wish everybody was as awesome as it is to work with Megan, because it's like my dream to take planners and project managers with me to say, you need to hear it. Like, I can tell you about it, but until you go hear it from people who generationally experienced it or who personally experienced it, it is not the same. And when you have to, it's painful. It's painful. It is palpable. And so you may have received the link to the executive summary of the 17 interviews that we did in the African American community. Megan and I did those together. We came up with a list of questions, but we didn't stick to the questions. We kind of let each one kind of go however people wanted, whatever they wanted to talk to us about, however they wanted to express. And it was good, bad, and ugly. And it was mostly ugly. And it wasn't just about ODOT, it was also, and the city did this, and private developers did this, and Prosper Portland did this. And, it was basically, the one quote that I can never forget from Pastor Hennessy was that whether intentionally or unintentionally, government systematically displaced the African American community. And then when the developments came to fruition, we got none of the work. And that was just heartbreaking. So what we did was we took and we did not edit them for content. We let people's words be as they were. And we put them in the summary and we shared them with high-level policymakers, bureau directors, elected officials at the city, Oregon Transportation Commission members. And that was so important, because what it did was it set the whole tone and the tenor for the project before it even got started in terms of the NEPA and the environmental process. It meant that when we put together our community advisory committee, half of the people on the community advisory committee were people of color. In my 13 years, I haven't even seen a community advisory committee that was a third people of color. So this is very significant. It also meant that one of the things we heard in the interviews was, you know what, we need people that look like us to be on the project. So I'm not going to say that we have as much diversity as we'd like, we never do, but we have several people of color who are working on the project, African American and Latino, Latina, and Asian. And actually what's kind of interesting to sort of happened is that a lot of the people that are working on the project are women. And that includes the consultant teams, that includes the designers, that includes the construction, that general contractor, and it includes the ODOT and PBOT teams. And the other thing we looked at was, community involvement. So it's not just about the community advisory committee, but, could we go to the Mississippi Street Fair? Yeah, but We'd rather go to Good in the Hood. We'd rather go to other specific, culturally specific, fairs that happen in the area to reach people that we're traditionally not going to get if we just hold an open house and say, come one, come all. It's not going to happen. So we determined early on that it was not a one size fits all. So did we have the open houses? Sure. Did we go out to the Good in the Hood and other events like that? Yes. Did we have a community advisory committee? Yes, that was diverse. And so that gives you, so the number one theme really that we walked away with in terms of what came out of those interviews was, what could we do, if anything? I'm going to say, I don't characterize myself as a normal bureaucrat. I kind of like to push the envelope and to see, okay, what is the cool thing that we can do? Yeah. So, I had already done some work on 82nd Avenue and on Outer Powell Boulevard. Part of it's under construction. I worked on that corridor for 13 years. So, so in this project, what came up was, wow, what can we do to really make an effort to make the project so that we benefit local and minority businesses benefit? What can we do? And so we actually hired a couple of consultants. One is a Latina and one is an African American to help us develop what that could look like. So what does that look like? Looks like when we are looking at design, when we are looking at developing the specifications that will go to contractors that they will have to bid on, it will have goals, a number goal that they will be held to, and we can withhold money if they can't show that they're making a good faith effort to meet their utilization goals that we've set forth and they've agreed to for minority utilization. Disadvantaged business enterprises is what it's called specifically, but non-minorities can also be designated as disadvantaged business enterprises. So we have held industry forums like at the Oregon Association of Minority Entrepreneurs, at the Convention Center, and we have been very clear and very open with potential general contractors who are interested in constructing this project, as well as the designers, that diversity and workforce diversity is a huge priority for us, and that you should not be surprised when the RFP, request for proposal, comes out and you need to come up with a good plan for how you're going to address that. How are you going to bring on maybe joint ventures? How are you going to integrate the number of diverse people that are going to be working on this project? And kind of couldn't believe it because, we kept talking about it, and we kept talking about it with decision makers and our agency. And one day they were like, do it. And that's like music to my ears, because I'm like, I've been waiting to do something like this, like my whole life. And so, so anyway, it's very exciting. It's really, really, really hard. It is really hard. Why? Because for years, right, these general contractors haven't had to do this. So it's a huge shift for them. It's a huge shift for us as an agency. We have an Office of Civil Rights in Salem who set these goals and do good work, but they're not the face of the project, and they're not here to, they didn't sit in the 17 interviews, you know what I mean? And we haven't really given underserved communities a really good reason to trust us. And they haven't done a lot of work on ODOT projects. And so we are really having to, build those relationships, build that trust, take, criticism and know where it's coming from. And I think it just gives us more motivation to want to do the right thing and to convince them that this is real. And if we can make this work by working together, then we can do it on other projects. So really excited about it, but it's really hard.
But it's so powerful to be able to use the feedback that we hear from the community to push our agency and ourselves to do business differently, which is why these interviews and outreach like this is really important for us.
We also
for a break. We can stop for a quick break.
Do you guys want a break? Do you guys want a break?
No.
Yeah. No? No? They're saying no. All right. So another thing that we did was we hired a consultant to help us with doing focus groups, 4 focus groups in different segments of the African American community. And we also, there was one other thing that just left my mind that we did that was really cool. Oh, I know. We've held a couple of faith-based pastor breakfasts where we've got to hear from the African American faith-based community about this project. And well, the historic harm that's been done in this area has been to the African American community. Our commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion really applies to all ethnic groups. And so that's what we're doing.
Can I say something else really quickly?
Yes, you may.
Our friend, Rhee Adams, who's a good friend of mine, who leads the Albina Vision.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring her to this class to speak on behalf of this project and many other things, but she looked at the registration. She goes, Twee, I actually wanted to take your class, which I thought was super cool. So at some point, I think we can all reconvene, but I think like Rhee would love to also be in this room to talk about this class. Her Thursdays are completely booked, but I just feel like she actually wanted to sit in this class just to learn more about transportation.
Yeah.
So it just speaks to the work that you guys are doing as well as some of the work that everyone else is contributing to.
And the Albina Vision is another stakeholder that we're working very closely with.
Huge, yeah.
Definitely. All right. I'm gonna jump to I'm gonna actually go here, project schedule, and then I'll go back. So this is sort of a snapshot of where we are today and what's to come. So we talked about the prior planning phase. We are in the midst of an environmental review phase right now that was kicked off in early 2017. Right now, the environmental assessment, which is a study of these different topics, transportation, environmental, health, social, built environment, and then heritage pieces like historic resources and archaeological resources, was published, as I said, earlier this year for public comment. There have been a number of comments that came in that we're actively working with the Federal Highway Administration to address. And we are also coordinating closely with our Oregon Transportation Commission, who will be directing us on the next steps for the environmental review process. I know some of the questions that were submitted from this group are, will this project be utilizing the environmental assessment that was done, or will it be going to an environmental impact statement? I do not know. The conversations with our Oregon Transportation Commission and key stakeholders are ongoing, and they will be directing us as ODOT staff on next steps there, likely by the end of the year. So I am as anxious as you are to know what our next steps forward on that are. But that said, we have a deliverable that's required by the legislature through House Bill 2017, which is our cost to complete report. And that's due, statutory requirement now, and that is due to the legislature by February of 2020. And so we are working on taking the design concept from the facility plan and as evaluated in the environmental document, and costing out what that project will be. So that's what the team is actively working on right now. Pending next steps on environmental, design would proceed with construction starting as early as 2023. We're expecting about a 4 to 5 year construction period with project completion in 2027. So the funding right now, the majority of funding is from House Bill 2017, again, as directed by the legislature. There's also some state funding and metro funding that has been programmed thus far. And we will, of course, be working with our federal, regional, state, and local partners to address any additional funding needs that we would have. One way of doing business differently, I'm going to get wonky for a second, is the way that we are delivering the project. So ODOT typically delivers projects by designing the project and then putting that design out for bid, and contractors put in their bids and proposals, and the contractor with the lowest cost to build the project gets the project and then builds the project. Because we want to better sort of address community engagement in our process, provide maximized opportunities for minority contracting, and really better managing risk on our project, we've decided to take a different approach in how we deliver the project. And that's called CMGC, for construction management general contractor. And what this means is that you would bring a contractor on early in the design phase. So rather than waiting until the design is fully done and kind of your cake is baked, we're bringing the contractor in to cook with us and help vet, well, is that design actually constructible? What if you did it this way? Maybe you would have a better outcome for community connection, or maybe you'd save money, or maybe we can do this twice as fast. And so it really, it helps with a more iterative and value engineering process moving forward. So with that, we brought on an owner's representative consultant. We also have our A&E design team on board, as well as an independent cost estimator as we're doing our cost to complete report, and then looking towards hiring a CMGC or that general contractor that would be helping us in our process. And so with this, we are able, Shelli was alluding to this, but we are able to be different with our contracting mechanisms and specifications and requirements for that contractor to hold them and really ourselves accountable for how we are best serving the community and engaging the minority contracting community. So with this, why was CMGC chosen? Again, it has cost-saving opportunities with that value engineering with the contractor vetting design early on, higher quality plans for construction, better opportunity really to address stakeholder input and community sensitivity, because as we're working through design, the contractor can be there with us, with you, working through key issues and improve risk management. I'm going to turn it back over to Shelli if you want to talk about the DDE program in more detail.
Yeah, so we have a COAC, a Community Opportunity Advisory Committee, which is basically made up of people like interest groups. So for example, NAMAC, the National Association of Minority Contractors, we have a local chapter. Portland Business Development Group, which is also a local chapter that advocates for minority business utilization. And so these are the kind of economic opportunities that we have identified working with that group that we want to advance forward as part of this project. And so it's not enough just to say, hey, we want you to work on this project. It's a good opportunity. It's also, we're going to provide you the technical assistance that you need to be successful. We're going to be looking at the diversity plan that the CMGC puts together to make sure that it is achievable and it's got some teeth to it. We are going to be looking at maybe some opportunities for like joint ventures where, you know, minority businesses can learn and grow and get the experience working with other folks on this project that have that experience, and that we want to be able to increase their expertise to be successful for not just working on this project, but other projects, whether it's with ODOT or with other government entities. So that is part of what we're doing as part of this effort, and we've shared this broadly, and we've also done a number of surveys in the minority business community. We've done a number of interview sit-downs to hear what the needs are, and that's kind of how we've gotten to identify this list. Yeah, so community engagement, like Suk said, you can't just sit in your glass palace and expect people to come to you or hold an open house. So this is Good in the Hood, where we did some community engagement. We've also been at Juneteenth. We've been at a number of different other events, and just talking to people like we are talking to you here. And, you know, sometimes we only have like 5 minutes, so we got to figure out like what is our quick hook to get people, you know, interested and engaged in the project. And that's it. We've gotten through it. Wow. Thank you for your help. Yes. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I noticed that you had a question in the back, and I didn't want to ignore you, but I knew we were close to finishing.
Do you guys want a break, or do you want a question? I just want to facilitate if you need a break, or you can take your own breaks.
We only got 25 minutes. We
Yeah.
Yeah.
10 or we can go through the questions that I had.
We've got like 10 minutes. We're at 8:30.
Okay.
Just a quick question on the CMGC thing.
Yeah.
That sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
Is that being adopted or looked at for other projects?
Oh, it's taking place. Yeah, definitely. So other DOTs use it. ODOT has used it in the past, I think just once before. So it's business for us, doing business differently. TriMet uses the CMGC model, City of Portland as well. So it's really, it's exciting for us as a state agency to be able to use this on the Rose Quarter project. And my hope is that we can make it a successful process so that we can use it on other projects in the future as well.
The Division Transit project that Melissa brought up is a CMGC. Yeah. Yep.
As Twee knows, I have a lot of questions, but the first and most important one, I thought, I know in you're talking about sort of the reasons for this project, safety is always what you emphasize, the safety nexus. And my recollection, unless it's changed, is in this section of road in the last decade, there have been 2 deaths, both of people who were walking on the freeway. So they wouldn't, so far as I can understand, have been addressed by faster speeds or wider shoulders. By contrast, I live a few blocks north of Powell, and there have been 3 deaths on ODOT-administered Southeast Powell Boulevard just this year. So what's the sense I have, and I guess a lot of my personal frustration with this project, apart from the history and so on, is it's hard to avoid the interpretation that this is primarily a capacity expanding freeway project, because that's what ODOT does, you know, because if prioritizing the safety of people who are in the area was paramount, I mean, those other streets that ODOT runs, notably Powell, but also 82nd, are just far more urgent in the toll of human lives. So I wonder if you can speak to that logic of spending $500 million on a place that sees zero deaths that the project would address, and not putting those resources into the places where Portlanders are getting killed every year and have been killed this year.
So it's not an either or, it's an and.
With state budgets, I think it's always an either or.
Not necessarily. So the money that's coming to fund this program came out of the House bill. We also got $110 million to fully design and construct outer Powell from I-205 to 174th.
The segment that you're
and
talking about.
That is, I mean, I have worked on, I'm sort of the crown princess of Powell at ODOT. Everybody laughs at me, but it's true. I happen to have lived in the Foster Powell neighborhood about 3 blocks off of Powell for 20 years. So when they told me I might get Powell taken out of my portfolio, I'm like, that's a deal breaker. Don't do that. That's what gets me up and gets me to work every day, as geeky as it sounds. But, you know, on outer Powell, they don't have sidewalks. They, you know, 122nd and Powell at one time was the highest crash intersection in the whole state, not only for the number of crashes, but the severity, loss of life, loss of limbs, people going to the hospital. And so right now under construction, it will be done by the end of next year. 122nd to 136th on Powell will be fully built out with sidewalks, bike lanes, a center turn lane, new rectangular rapid flash beacons, which are the pedestrian activated beacons that you see. And now we have the money through the House bill to do the rest of outer Powell, which will go from I-205 to 122nd, 136 to 174th. And I just finished a project that was about $3.5 million-ish over in inner Powell, which went from 20th to 34th. And that included 3 new signals, and including new signals protected left. So if you're on 26th Avenue and you want to go and turn, now there are signals there, so that if you've got like bikes or through traffic, you don't have to wait for the gap. You actually have a signal. So we did that at 26th, and that was a really awful intersection. And we also did protected lefts from Powell onto 33rd, and also protected lefts on Powell onto 21st in both directions. So we are, and then on 82nd, actually the legislature also gave us money for a $21 million project in the Lindy to Foster area. So I got 2 more questions, sorry. Go ahead.
Who's the lead on the air quality assessment? Is it a consultant?
Rose
or-
quarter?
Yeah, so for the environmental assessment was done by a consultant team that is AECom is the consultant team.
And who's that person?
The agency is AECom, and there were a number of different individuals working on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
There was a question over here.
Yeah, I volunteer with Go Lloyd, and we talk about Broadway and Weidler a lot. And it seems to me that Broadway and Weidler are not your jurisdiction; they're PBOT, right?
Correct.
So, how did it wind up that you guys end up doing it? So another thing is Broadway and Weidler, super high crash corridors.
Yep.
And how did you wind up doing some of the improvement projects? Are they providing some of the funding as well, or are you working with them on partnering for a enhanced Broadway Weidler further out, kind of like east of I-5 too?
Yeah, so this project, as I said, is a partnership of ODOT and the city, and our city counterpart unfortunately could not be here this evening, otherwise we would have had that representation. But to date, the funding is solely provided by the state. And as it relates to improvements outside of the project area, I know that the city is contemplating improvements to the Broadway-Weidler corridor, changes to the Broadway-Weidler corridor. And while not part of this project, it's incumbent upon us in partnership with the city to make sure that we're coordinating the Rose Quarter efforts and then other projects that are happening immediately adjacent and connecting to the project.
Okay, we have two or three more questions and 4 minutes. So I'm going to go with you first, then you, then you.
Was induced demand considered in this whole process, and is it considered that this might not even be effective, that this will just drive more cars and that it will end up being the same congestion?
Yeah, so we did a robust traffic modeling for this project to help answer that question. Used the Metro's regional traffic demand model for their regional traffic or regional transportation plan, and compared the modeling of building the project and not building the project. And what it found is that with building the project, you do have a reduction in crashes, and you do have improvements in operations on the system. And as you're looking at the network sort of as a whole, I-5 corridor and the local street network, right now there are a number of vehicles that don't use I-5 because it's so congested, and so they use local arterial roads. And so what the traffic modeling shows is the shift from local arterial roads and getting people back onto the highway rather than being on the local system. So the total of network cars doesn't change, it's just where they are located in that network and which facility they're using.
Right here.
So doesn't ODOT control the sphere around their roads? So like all of I-5, ODOT has control of the overpasses, and I want to say a block in either direction?
It kind of depends on the location and particular maintenance and operations agreements, but yeah, ODOT.
It's at least a block in all directions. It's oftentimes more. So that kind of answers your question really for that specific area, the caps and all that. That's all ODOT. It's not.
No, it's city jurisdiction. The city owns the streets. Like Broadway and Weidler, Williams and Vancouver, even in the interchange area are city
ODOT
streets.
and PBOT often get it loggerheads because PBOT does something and ODOT says that's not well related to the highway, and PBOT has had to go back and change it.
Yes.
I can give you 3 examples if you like.
Yes, the overpass on Rosa Parks, would that be one?
That would be one, yeah.
I gotcha. Yeah.
So anyway.
that was that overpass on Rosa Parks. So we're responsible for the structure, right? And so in that instance, what happened was this city maintenance bureau, PBOT maintenance bureau, went out and striped without consulting with us. Now, if something happens, like someone gets hit or whatever, then they could sue us. And if we didn't put in the striping and we weren't asked permission to give a permit for that striping, you could see how that could be problematic.
The specific concern is ODOT wanted narrower bike lanes on the street. Is that
I don't know. It had to, I don't know. I don't exactly remember. It had to do with the striping though. And so what happened was PBOT went back and said, you were right. We actually, communication broke down between our Bureau of Maintenance and PBOT. And so we will go and fix it. And so, you know, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's always a perfect relationship, because that's the nature of government. You go to public administration school, you learn tension is normal. So, but you know, we also partner really well on a lot of projects, and AutoPow is an example of that. And so is some of the work on 82nd and this work on Rose Quarter. So hold on, because I want to take him, and then if we have time, we'll come back to you.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Hopefully this don't take long. I only got two questions. One of the questions is are there any alternate freight routes that ODOT is trying to adopt with? For example, 99 Union Street, MLK was a freight mode process compared to I-5. So is there any other alternative route that Frank can use, kind of echoing other questions from earlier? Then also the other one was, I know y'all have been doing a lot of external partnerships with minority businesses to provide that equity input, but have there been have ODOT done any internal training on equity and racial equity, just how other local entities like PBOT, they got an equity and inclusive manager? Is ODOT kind of going that way or not yet? Or
yeah. I can answer your first question really quickly, and then we can have maybe Shelli answer the second one. So freight routes. So you've got I-5 running north-south. You also have I-205 to the east, and then 405 to the west. So those are kind of the main freight routes in the area. I-5 is significant though, in that it provides that direct connection down to Swan Island area where there's a lot of industry. And so there's not a lot of alternative routes to that specific area, sort of as Rose Quarter connects to that. So does that kind of answer your question?
On the second question, good question. So
yeah, really
I have gone through 2 or 3 modules of diversity training. I thought they could have been better, and it's been a while. And what's really exciting to me is that yesterday the Senate confirmed our new state director, Chris Strickler, and one of his big priorities is equity, and that's really exciting. I don't think I've ever heard that since I've worked at ODOT. And additionally, on this project in particular, we are looking at working with the city to engage diversity and equity trainers, in particular for our design team, as they're looking, how do they design a system that is for all people? And we don't want, somebody referenced the study, Suk did, I think, Walking While Black, we want it to be designed for it to be as safe as it can be for everybody. And then we are also looking to potentially, if we can identify the permanent financing, create a position for our mega projects office, which is where Rose Quarter will be housed. And that person will be looking at how they can focus equity, whether it's in design or with the contractor. And finally, we will be hiring a statewide equity manager that will report to our state director. Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody for your time today. It was wonderful to share our project with you and hear your different perspectives.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Full of questions for you guys.
Oh, you've got questions? No? No questions on
No, I think
okay.
we gotta close. We gotta close.
Can we do the announcement about the?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, so when I was at the Earl Blumenauer Bridge groundbreaking, I heard about what did I say it was? TPAC.
TPAC.
Yeah,
I call it Tupac because it's not.
Which it's the Central East Side Industrial District's Transportation and Parking Advisory Council, and they have openings right now, and it's an open application. You don't have to live or work in the Central East Side District to be a member, and the deadline is December 1st. So I encourage you, if you are the kind of person who has the bandwidth to be on a council like that, they are going to be having some interesting changes coming up soon. One of the things recently that happened is that they're going to be doing I think it's a demonstration project with PGE for like a transportation hub for electric vehicles and bikes and stuff. I don't have the bandwidth to do this, but I thought that it would be the perfect opportunity for somebody in this class. And yeah, if you
actually right here.
If you are interested, that's the website, and please look and apply before December 1st.
This came out of directorship's office.
Yeah, but she didn't seem to know about it when we asked her about it.
But I think it's a really good opportunity.
Can I speak to that real quickly?
Yeah.
So I'm with PWAT. I'm the manager of the Transportation Wallet Program, which is a program that uses parking permit surcharge fees in the Central East Side Parking District, as well as the Northwest Parking District, to offset the cost of a transportation options package to get people to drive and park less and to take transit, bike, and walk and scoot more. And so I was just meeting with the TPAC yesterday. And so if you want to be involved, it's a really great opportunity because you get to vote how the surcharge fees get allocated. And for context, the Central East Side has the highest parking permit fee in the city. And because of that, our 2020 Transportation Wallet Package, which Michael works on me with, I'm pretty excited about it. For $99 retail cost, people are getting a $250 TriMet Hop card, a year on the streetcar, $50 worth of scooter credit, and a year on Bike Town. So that's just one of the amazing things that you can do with parking permit surcharges. If anybody wants to talk to me later.
How do you guys get it to keep going up each year?
Because I keep asking for it, because I'm making
I know how much
presentations to
it's
the
spent
committee.
each year.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
How much is,
I'm sorry?
how much is the parking
$370. They voted about 5 or so years ago to increase it incrementally. It went from $60, which had no surcharge, and then every year it's gone up. By comparison, over in Northwest, it's $195, and they voted to decrease the value of the wallet this coming 2020 year. So anyway, we can talk about this offline.
Does anybody have any other questions? Comments? Suggestions? Additions? Deletions? We have a couple more minutes left. Are you guys all ready for projects in 2 weeks? Or do you want to chat more about it?
As far as giving them, what would be easiest if we wanted to do PowerPoint slides, or do you have a preference of the format? Or
I really do. I mean, I really give you the option as to what you want to do. Flip charts. That works too. That totally works. So if you do do a presentation, PowerPoint presentation, give me the thumb drive, at least, yeah. Or email it to me, or put it on the Google Drive.
Is the clicker like now operational for the class?
It seemed like a big update.
Yeah. That was really good.
I feel like it's taken us the whole term to figure that out. I'm so sorry, you guys are like getting big.
Feel sorry for the speakers. They're like, next. Yeah.
Right.
We got it. And we probably got a mic last week that I forgot at home today. So I'll bring the mic. I don't need it anymore, but I'll bring it in 2 weeks. I'm available. I'm here. Yes.
I was just going to ask if they're after the 5th, this last day. I was just curious to how do we get evaluated as students? Like, do we?
Oh yeah, we need to talk about.
Kid or like grade or?
PSU students will get grades.
We all have grades?
If you guys,
Make up grades
if you
for
guys
them.
want to grade, I can really grade you, but I probably shouldn't grade unless you are PSU students. And so what I'll do is I'll submit the grades to Aaron and then process it. We are bringing back certificates for the class, and I don't remember if it's been done in the last decade or so.
Nothing I.
Yeah.
I think a long time ago, my predecessor.
Yeah, way back. Huh?
I'm gonna frame it.
You're gonna frame yours. Okay, awesome. We're in the works for it. It looks super cool. So you guys are not
Michael
gonna
designed them. He did it really.
Michael designed them.
I do like that.
Yeah, he did a fantastic. You gotta frame it, put it on your wall, share it with your friends, and they can come and take this class. But it'll be signed by our commissioner in charge, so Commissioner Udaley, and signed by Director Chris Warner and me.
And Damian Lillard.
Yes. Oh, really? Wait, do you want Damian Lillard or the new guy, Anthony Camilo Anthony? How about both?
Are they, is like Chris and other director people empowered?
We'll be here.
To be here?
Yeah, Chris Warner will be here. Somebody, Jamie?
Yeah, Jamie Duhamel from the commissioner's staff
Will be here. The water barrel director may come. I've invited him. He's spoken to most of my other classes, so it's kind of a late evening, so he might come. Whoever else you guys want to bring in, let me know in advance, and I can send an invite out. You were talking about Roger Geller, perhaps. I'll send an invite to all of our former guest speakers to have them come back. Some are interested to hear about your projects.
Should our parents come if we're getting certificates?
Definitely.
Do you want me to like graduation walk up in the aisle or something? I'm like hand over.
Yes.
Do you want a copy of our project?
Sure. You want to submit it? I'll take it. I know that you have like a big gigantic binder that you might want to give it to somebody else that would be more useful than me. Can I see the show of hands of those who are interested in the field trip? Because we're still doing that. Oh my, okay.
I'm gonna bring my partner with me.
Absolutely. Okay.
I was gonna bring my kid.
Fine, you can bring your kid. You might be able to bring your dog, but not to dim sum. Juana here, who's also our classmate, will help me lead the tour through the J District. So I'll send out more of a more refined agenda for that.
What is the date?
Saturday, December 14th, starting at 10 o'clock, dim sum first. And then we'll figure out the agenda. But I'm thinking it would start at 10 and then would end like maybe 1 or 2-ish, noon-ish.
Is that when dim sum opens?
Dim sum opens at 9:30.
Get there early.
Do you guys want to do 9:30 then? We could start at 9:30. Okay, let's do that.
If there's many of us, in order to get a table,
Somebody
we have
put
to
a
be
coat on a
early,
chair
right?
for me.
Yeah, I can.
And in Ocean City, we're doing Ocean City.
It's one of the few days I get to sleep in.
Ocean City is a little easier to get in. Yeah.
I will re-invite Tamika Butler. She says she really loves dim sum, but I think she's in I think it's busy. Potluck. We're still gonna do a potluck prior to the final presentations. So potluck presentation, and then dim sum and walk it all off. And then we'll meet some folks from Oklahoma.
So we'll do the potluck like right out in the hallway over here, just before class time.
Is there a sign up for the dishes?
Yeah, it's on the Google Drive.
Oh, good.
Read your email.
I'll check it out.
Forgive me if I've asked you this before.
Yes.
There's a new blinking light on the front of a lot of the buses.
Give it to me. So we're at potluck,
Okay.
and then we'll load it all up.
We'll get it ready on the computer.
Yeah, we'll get it ready on the computer, and I'll figure out the time for each person. I'm thinking alphabetical order.
I know a lot of people have asked me.
Okay. Practice to get it under 3 minutes. 300 people. And then you were stuck in traffic.
Hey,
Man, I was surprised,
like, they called.
Wednesday, my free and I can come out and meet you. That works.